Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the games of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. In this episode, we finish out November 1990 with the release of one of the Mega Drive's best platformers, as well as the launch of the system's stiffest competition. Let's get started. Much has been written about Sega's quest for its own killer app, a character-based platformer that could compete with Nintendo and the almighty Mario. And while it's common knowledge that Sonic was eventually that game, anyone who was paying attention at the end of 1990 knows Sega already had an amazing platformer for its Genesis. Castle Evolution is like the perfect storm, an extremely solid hop-and-bop platformer that checks all the required boxes, featuring one of the most recognizable characters in the world, wrapped up in an incredible soundtrack and just oozing charm from start to finish. This is the first in a run of Sega games featuring Disney characters, and it's one hell of a debut. Jealous of Minnie's beauty, the evil witch Mizrabel has kidnapped Mickey's bow and spirited her away to the Castle of Illusion. Mickey must enter the castle and climb the tallest tower to battle for Minnie's freedom. Along the way, our mouse has to collect the 7 rainbow gems in order to build a bridge to the final showdown with Mizrabel. For the most part, Mickey controls like you would expect. Tapping the jump button while in the air allows him to butt-stomp his enemies into oblivion. Holding the jump button at this point results in an even higher rebound, meaning, much like Mario, Mickey has to use his enemies strategically in order to reach higher platforms. Our hero is also able to use projectiles, which change slightly from level to level, to deal with tight quarters where jumping just isn't an option. While you don't see any specific Disney characters or levels outside of Mickey and Minnie, the game's worlds and creatures definitely fit the bill. From a pastel Candyland featuring a boss that bears a striking resemblance to Pete's Dragon, to a romp through Toyland, to a level that seems taken straight out of 1947's Mickey and the Beanstalk. In fact, the sheer diversity of the levels is one of the game's great accomplishments. Even within each world, the game will change things up, such as the area in the forest where Mickey is suddenly shrunk down to insect size and has to jump from one floating leaf to another in front of a beautiful backdrop filled with dew-covered spider webs. Or a later cave where Mickey finds himself battling upstream against a rushing torrent of water that threatens to sweep him all the way back to the beginning of the level. The quality and diversity of the level design is matched by the music. Composed by Shigenori Kamiya, the range of the pieces found in the game is impressive. You get the bouncy music you'd expect while walking along the forest or Toyland, but without missing a beat, the music gets very sinister and dark along with the game's visuals. Mickey himself brings not only a recognizable hero, but personality as well. His jaunty walk makes him look perpetually happy as he navigates each world, though when he ducks, he definitely looks pensive, and watching him fall into a bottomless pit is almost heartbreaking as he reaches for the sky and cries out. Walk to a ledge and watch him fight to maintain his balance, or simply stand still and watch him sway back and forth to the music. Castle of Illusion might not represent the very first interesting idle animation in a platformer, but it's definitely one of the earliest examples. I spoke to Disney producer Stefan Butler, and he called out Mickey's idle animation as one of his favorite bits of the game, saying that he hated how Mickey would just freeze when he stopped early on in development. He said the idle animations were just that extra 2% that he thought people would hardly notice, but would pull the person into the fantasy that much deeper. How right he was. Castle of Illusion is the second of a 3-game deal struck between Sega of America and Disney, though it's the first to feature Disney characters. It was developed by Sega of Japan, Sega AM7 to be exact. In a 2006 Sega 16 interview with Sega America producer Jim Huther, he's quick to point out that while development took place in Japan, Sega of America and Disney drove the creative aspect and had final approval. When I spoke to Stefan Butler, he made it clear that it was the 3 entities working in harmony with each other. While Sega AM7 did the development, the game never would have happened had any of the 3 groups not been involved the way they were. It's also worth noting that Castle of Illusion appears to be the first game by designer Emiko Yamamoto, who went on to work on many of Sega's Disney games before moving to Disney itself and producing Square Enix's Kingdom Hearts series. Castle of Illusion was an instant classic, a great example of multiple studios collaborating around the world to produce a truly special game. It even had an almost simultaneous worldwide launch, coming out just days apart in the US, Japan, and Europe. Butler told me that the game still stands as one of the highlights of his career. When it came out, it smashed expectations, garnered great reviews, and toppled John Madden Football from the #1 spot in sales. It's kind of a shame that Sonic came out so soon after Castle of Illusion, as it definitely stole some of the thunder from the Disney game. Still, it went on to spawn a long-running series of loosely connected sequels across multiple platforms, and was even remade for modern consoles and PCs in 2013. You can probably tell by my rambling that I absolutely love this game. Castle of Illusion was absolute proof that Sega could create a platforming masterpiece. In the early morning hours of November 21st, 1990, a crowd of delivery trucks began driving away from a Kyoto warehouse, while similar warehouses dispatched similar trucks all across Japan. Operation Midnight Shipping was concocted to head off the possible hijacking of shipments of the most anticipated video game console in the history of the country. Nintendo's Super Famicom. Nintendo had finally sat on its laurels long enough. Although Sega had barely taken a bite out of its home market with the Mega Drive, NEC's PC Engine was another story. After letting NEC eat into its customer base for 3 years, Nintendo reasserted itself as the market leader by selling all 300,000 launch units of its 16-bit console in a matter of days. Later reports claim that it could have easily sold 1.5 million units in that time. The Super Famicom controller was revolutionary, sporting 4 face buttons as opposed to the Mega Drive's 3, as well as 2 innovative shoulder buttons, allowing for a total of 6 different interface options, along with the historically great Nintendo D-pad. The system itself was a beast. Spec for spec, it generally blows the Mega Drive out of the water, especially in the realm of audio and visuals. The Super Famicom's color palette is massive compared to the Mega Drive, and the custom Sony sound chip pumped out gorgeous music and effects. There was one chink in the armor though. Look at the clock speed. The Genesis workhorse CPU is over twice as fast as the maximum speed of the Super Famicom's brain. This is something Sega of America's marketing division in particular would latch onto in the coming years, with spectacular results. The Super Famicom launched with 2 games, Super Mario Bros. 4, Super Mario World, and F-Zero, a futuristic racing game featuring lightning-quick hovercraft. F-Zero is a technical showpiece, built to take advantage of the Super Famicom video hardware's Mode 7. The system had 8 different background graphics modes that it could switch between, performing various tricks that would normally have to be done right in the software. Mode 7 will become the most popular, the ability to scale and rotate a large sprite smoothly. Thankfully, F-Zero was much more than just a technical showpiece. It was a fantastic game to boot. Of course, the real star of the launch was the latest masterpiece from Shigeru Miyamoto and his team, Super Mario World. It was like Super Mario Bros. 3 on steroids. All the great gameplay, plus almost 100 huge, super colorful levels to run around in. New enemies, new friends, and a soundtrack that put the new system through its paces. Although the Super Famicom was hard to get at launch, Sega of Japan reportedly snagged 2, one of which they sent to their counterparts in America. Al Nielsen, Sega's director of marketing, spent the weekend playing Super Mario World and was reportedly unimpressed. According to Console Wars by Blake J. Harris, Nielsen freely admitted the game was fun, finely tuned, and expertly crafted. Exactly what one would expect from Nintendo. But that was also the problem in his eyes. It was just more of the same. He explained a little bit more in episode 50 of the Sega Nerds podcast.
And that's when, Tom Kalinske said to me, prove it. And I went and I did playtests around the country and let people play Super Famicom, which they had never seen before, with Super Mario World, and Sonic the Hedgehog, which they had never seen before. But to make it even harder, we wanted the majority of people who were playing to love Mario. Not just like Mario, love Mario. Because if we could go and convince them, then we knew we had a winner. And what came out of those playtests was that 80% of the people chose Sonic over Mario. So we knew that we had this giant secret weapon.
Based on Nintendo's history, Kalinske and Nielsen figured they had about 9 months before the Super Famicom would hit American shores, and that Mario would most likely be in the box. In fact, they were hoping for the latter, due to their total belief that they had the game to beat it. They had 9 months to build momentum and unleash their little blue hedgehog on the American market. And Tom Kalinske had a plan to make sure everyone who bought a Genesis would own its very best game. The puzzle genre was red hot following the success of Tetris, especially after it hit the Game Boy and NES. No surprise then that Genesis newcomer Accolade would choose to port a puzzle game to mark its console debut. Ishido features a very simple rule set. You are presented with a board divided into 96 spaces and a set of 72 stones to place. Each stone contains a combination of one of 6 symbols and 6 colors. If you lay a stone next to another, it has to match either its neighbor's color or symbol. If you lay a stone next to 2 others, it has to match one symbol and the other's color. It sounds pretty simple, and it is at first. But as the board fills up, it gets more and more difficult to find a legal spot for every tile. In fact, I've never placed all 72 of them. Ishido on the Genesis doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles. You can change the type of symbols and backgrounds in the game, and you can turn on various hints like indicators of available placement or peeking at your remaining tiles. Otherwise, though, there's nothing else to this cartridge. Ishido has an interesting story behind it. Originally developed for the Macintosh computer, intended publisher Epyx declared bankruptcy right around the time Ishido was finished. But the developers weren't about to give up. Programmer Ian Gilman describes the team's feeling. We'd put so much love and energy into the game, we couldn't stand the thought of just letting it die. So that's why we released a limited edition. The limited edition Ian is referring to was released in this beautiful Japanese-style walnut slipcase. There were only 1,000 made, and each one was numbered and signed by the team. It must have generated enough buzz because Accolade stepped in and signed on to publish the Mac and PC versions a year later, as well as pushing the game to multiple consoles including the Game Boy, Lynx, and Genesis. While Ishido is a bit of a low-key release, it's actually quite an important one for the Genesis as it brought another major US PC game maker into the fray. Accolade was founded in 1984 by game industry veterans Bob Whitehead and Alan Miller. Bob and Alan were alumni of Atari and were two of the founding members of Activision in 1979. However, they both thought, correctly, that the console focus of Activision was short-sighted, and so left to form Accolade. Legend has it that Accolade was so named because it would be listed earlier than Activision in phone directories at the time, much like Activision was so named in order to appear above Atari. This was a trend that continued with subsequent ex-Activision companies like Acclaim and Absolute. It was actually a legit naming scheme for many companies back when the main way customers found your business was through a phone directory. 30 years ago, there were loads of AAA limo services, cab companies, pizza places, auto shops, etc. in Canada and the US. Anyway, the impetus behind starting Accolade was to focus on the PC market. So while the NES revived the video game console in the mid-80s, Accolade made its name releasing successful computer games like the Test Drive and Hardball series. Test Drive, by the way, was developed by Don Matrick's Distinctive Software, the company that would eventually become Electronic Arts Canada. By the late 80s, though, much like rival Electronic Arts, Accolade knew it couldn't afford to stay out of the lucrative console market. And, like EA, Accolade balked at the licensing deals required by Sega and Nintendo. In Stephen Kent's Ultimate History of Video Games, Accolade founder Alan Miller is quoted as saying that the licensing agreement just about doubled the cost of goods to the independent publisher, as well as driving up the price for the consumer. Thus, Accolade chose not to accept the licensing agreement, in favor of reverse engineering the system and publishing its own game. This is why there's no seal of quality on Ishido's box, and why the cartridge is a completely different shape. Accolade's engineers purchased the system and 3 cartridges, and set up the console so that it would produce a printout of executable code used by the games. By comparing the printouts, they were able to discover how to disable the existing security system on the Genesis. The exact way Accolade went about this process would become very important about a year down the road. It would have huge implications not only on Sega's relationship with third-party publishers, but on the nature of the industry itself. Namco had already dipped a toe in the puzzler waters with a port of Atari's Klax earlier in the year. At the end of November, it's back with its own original entry, Megapanel. Megapanel is a color matching game, but rather than tiles falling from the sky, it features an ever-growing mountain of colored blocks that the player must match in order to make them disappear. The interface is quite unique. Rather than rotating or swapping tiles, the user manipulates them by sliding them in one of 4 directions, much like a classic 15 puzzle, where you would try to get 15 tiles in the correct order within a 16-space grid. Megapanel comes with 3 distinct modes. Exercise teaches the player the basics of the game through a series of levels. Pin-up is the main single-player mode, where matched blocks result in bombs being dropped in the opposite well, blowing up tiles and slowly revealing the picture underneath. And then there's the 2-player mode, where matched tiles will result in garbage blocks being dropped in your opponent. This is played in a best 2 out of 3 series. Megapanel is an interesting package. Depending on which mode you choose, it features completely different musical styles and slightly different graphics. Especially odd is the sepia color setting. I have no idea why this even exists or why one would ever use it. It reminds me a bit of the old black and white toggle on the original Atari 2600. Of course, that had an actual purpose back in the mid-70s. I find Megapanel especially difficult. The unique interface makes for some interesting challenges. Splitting your mountain of tiles in 2 can result in getting stuck on one side of the well, forcing you to speed up the scroll in order to escape your prison, which you can do by tapping the A button. Of course, if even one of your columns reaches the top of the screen, it's game over. Because the game is so hard, not many people have uncovered all of the pin-ups in Megapanel. There was a persistent rumor for quite a while on the internet that the later pictures featured some nudity. Thanks to a post on Japanese blog Dangerous Driver ZNT's Room around 2002, it seems clear that the pictures do get a bit racy, but stay pretty PG-13 in general. The Queen of Ahas has been kidnapped by a marauding alien force that has set up a 33-level fortress full of trampolines and explosive charges. Use your acrobatic skills to destroy each and every level in order to save the princess. But be careful. Each level is patrolled by all manner of alien beasts, and one wrong step will see you plummeting to the planet's surface below. What a bizarre setup. Trampoline Terror is an action puzzle game where you must walk over a certain number of switches in each level in order to move on to the next. All you can do is walk, jump, and throw power balls as long as there are some available on your current level. Your powers are augmented by the trampolines present in most areas. Trampolines allow you to jump across gaps, and high enough to jump over most enemies. You can also throw power balls on trampolines to make them skip along an entire row or column of tiles. The risk with the trampolines is that they weaken every time you jump on them, eventually breaking and becoming nothing but a big hole in the level. Trampoline Terror starts out kinda slow and easy, but the difficulty ramps up quickly. Enemies pursue you relentlessly and respawn endlessly. It's very common to get swarmed in later levels. The switches you have to hit are colored and can be used to your advantage. Not only can you destroy enemies that get caught in the blast of an activated switch, but activating multiple switches of the same color triggers various power-ups, such as knocking all enemies off the level, freezing them for a few seconds, or earning you an extra life. There's strategy to using the power balls as well. Thrown power balls can be collected again as long as they don't fall off the level. Of course, if you skip one down a long line of trampolines, it might go off the edge of the world, and you really have no way of knowing that unless you've already seen the other end. Trampoline Terror represents a first for the Mega Drive. This is the first game created by a Japanese developer that was only ever released in North America. Masaya did have plans to release the game in its native Japan under the name Explode Star. It even went as far as to advertise the game. But for whatever reason, the game was cancelled and only ever saw release on this side of the world. I really wanted to dislike Trampoline Terror, but as I played more of it, I found that I was really enjoying myself. It still feels a bit basic for a Genesis game from late 1990, and the premise obviously did it no favors at retail, but still, it's fun for a little while. The fourth and final puzzle game this episode comes courtesy of Micronet. Junction is similar to Namco's Megapanel in that the basic interface is a sliding block challenge. Here, though, you have a grid full of tiles with different paths on them, and a ball rolling ahead constantly. It's your job to shift the tiles around and create a safe path so that your ball can roll over special curves at the outside of each board. Roll over all the curves without running out of time, paths, or falling into a hole, and you move on to the next level. On the box it says the game is rated H for the high level of intellect needed to complete it. They're not joking around either. This game is one of the most difficult I've ever played. Within a few levels, you start to see some devious puzzles that not only require a load of forethought to complete, but relatively quick reflexes as you work to shift around tiles while the ball is still on them. And the ball doesn't stop moving. You have a limited amount of slow time you can trigger with the press of a button, but it buys you precious few seconds to make a move. The timer doesn't stop either. You can also hold a button to speed up your ball, but the timer speeds up right along with it. That means on top of everything else, the time pressure stays pretty intense throughout. Oh, and you'll notice that various obstacles and enemies periodically appear. So yeah, this game is ridiculous. On the plus side, you can turn off those enemies by selecting Easy Mode. And the developers obviously knew they'd made a ridiculously difficult game because you can choose to play any one of the 50 available levels right in the options screen. In fact, beating the game apparently requires you to hit a certain total score threshold, not complete each level in a specific order. You may have noticed the Konami copyright in the title screen. No, Konami did not develop or publish this game. It's actually loosely based off a 1989 arcade release called Kubrick. The basic premise is the same. A ball travels along a grid that you must manipulate. But here the goal is to pass over every single path piece. And that'll do it for this episode of Generation 16. Join me next time as we enter the final month of 1990 with yet another appearance by Joe Musashi. See you then! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, please consider supporting the show through Patreon. And don't forget to visit the website and give the Facebook page a like.